Please, uncle, we must visit their grave, the 8-year-old girl whispered, clutching a photo of her smiling parents. Her uncle snatched the frame from her small hands, his laugh cold and sharp. The dead don't need visitors, Maya, he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. They need their assets managed. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the cherished photograph across the polished table, shattering the little girl's heart with the scraping sound. At that very moment, the door burst open. Her father's millionaire best friend walked in, the gift box in his hand, slipping to the floor as he witnessed the horrifying scene. A single sentence from his lips would silence everyone in the room. Before we begin our story, please leave a comment about it and give us a score from 1 to 10. Are you doing okay? If there is anything you would like to share, I am always here to listen. I hope you find a moment of reflection on this journey of healing, courage, and justice. The grand hall of the Rockefeller Mansion glowed with brilliant light. No, that is the wrong story. Our story does not begin in such a glow. Our story begins in the suffocating silence of a house where everything had been stolen. 1 year. An entire year since grief had seeped into the air like a poison, and laughter had become the echo of a distant dream. 8-year-old Maya sat on the floor, ignoring the expensive toys her uncle had bought to distract her. Her only focus was the silver picture frame in her hands. With a soft cloth, she polished it until her own reflection appeared next to the radiant smiles of her parents, Michael and Lena. Their names were a prayer, a warm and aching glow in her chest. Her quiet ritual was shattered by a sharp, booming voice. "Profit is a predator, Henderson. It doesn't wait for you to feel ready." Her Uncle Marcus was in the dining room, his voice a hammer on the anvil of the morning. He had descended upon the house like a vulture after the funeral, draping his expensive suits in her father's closets and filling the air with the bitter smoke of his cigars. Clutching the frame to her chest, Maya gathered every ounce of her courage. She stood in the doorway of the vast, opulent room. Marcus slammed the phone down and scowled at a stack of papers, his gold watch glinting under the chandelier. "Uncle Marcus?" Her voice was a fragile thread in the heavy silence. He sighed with pure irritation and looked up. "What is it now, Maya? Can't you see I'm managing an empire here?" "It's today," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "The anniversary. I picked some flowers. We need to go to the cemetery." Marcus stared at her for a moment, and then he did something that broke her heart more than a shout ever could. He laughed. It was not a warm, joyful sound. It was a dry, rasping noise, like stones grinding together. "The cemetery? Are you serious?" He leaned back in his chair. "My God, you're just like him, drowning in useless sentiment." He beckoned her closer with a flick of his fingers. As she approached, he snatched the frame from her. He held it up, but he wasn't looking at the faces of his brother and sister-in-law. He was examining the silver, weighing it in his hand. "They're dead, Maya. Dead. They can't smell your flowers, and they certainly can't hear your prayers. This," he said, tapping a contemptuous finger on the glass over her father's face, "is over. This," he gestured to the papers, to the house, to himself, "is what's real now. Power. Money. Please," she whispered, tears blurring his cruel face. "I promised them I would always visit." "Promises to the dead are for children and fools," he sneered. He didn't hand the frame back. He tossed it carelessly across the table. The sickening sound it made scraping across the polished wood was a desecration. "Your father was a good man, but a weak one. His sentimentality almost cost this family everything. I saved it. Remember that." He stood up, towering over her. "Now I will not waste my valuable time sitting in a field of bones, and neither will you. Since you're so eager to be useful, go and polish the rest of the silver in the cabinet. My silver. Make it shine." The command was a final, brutal dismissal. He had taken her most sacred duty and replaced it with a servant's chore. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The air was thick with his cruelty, with the ashes of her hope. He turned his back on her, already picking up the phone again, dismissing her as easily as he had dismissed the photograph. Hot tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of rage now, not just sorrow. She ran to the table, her small hands grabbing the picture frame. With the sleeve of her sweater, she furiously wiped away the smudge his thumb had left on the glass, as if trying to erase his touch from her memory itself. She would not polish his silver. She would keep her promise. Her backpack was still by the door of her room. She grabbed it, her movements now swift and silent. She crept through the house, her uncle's booming voice about hostile takeovers fading behind her. She didn't use the front door, but the small, creaking one in the kitchen that led out into the overgrown garden. The cold air hit her like a slap, waking her from the nightmare inside. She didn't look back. She fled. Not just from the house, but from the man who was trying to erase her past. She ran toward the only two people in the world who would never, ever let her go. The city was a monster of stone and steel, and it did not care for the grief of a little girl. Maya kept to the side of the bustling sidewalks, a small, determined ship navigating a sea of indifferent giants. The growl of traffic was a constant roar in her ears, and the faces that rushed past were a blur of impatience. No one saw the tears still drying on her cheeks, or the fierce, protective way she clutched the straps of her backpack, where the photograph of her parents lay like a sacred relic. Her father had shown her the way many times. "If you ever get lost, sweet pea," he'd said, his voice a warm melody, "just follow the sun until you reach the river, then walk along the water until you see the old iron gates. The trees will welcome you home." He'd made a game of it, teaching her landmarks: the bakery with the smiling gingerbread man in the window, the bookstore with a sleeping cat on its sign, the bridge where you could hear the echo of your own voice. Now, each landmark was a painful memory, a ghost of a happier time. She bought a single, perfect white rose from a street vendor with the pocket money she had saved, the coins feeling heavy and important in her palm. The cold wind whipped at her hair and bit at her exposed skin, but she barely felt it. A fire burned in her chest, a fire fueled by her uncle's cold laugh and the scraping sound of the frame on the table. He was wrong. Memories weren't useless. Love wasn't a weakness. It was the only thing she had left. Finally, she saw them. The tall, wrought iron gates, their black spires like skeletal fingers pointing to the sky. Oakwood Cemetery. The noise of the city fell away as she stepped through, replaced by a profound and peaceful silence, broken only by the rustling of ancient trees. This was not a place of fear for Maya. It was a place of connection. She knew the path by heart. Past the weeping angel statue, its stone face streaked with green, left at the giant oak tree whose roots had buckled the earth. Straight on until she reached the small, gentle slope that overlooked the river. Her parents had chosen the spot for its beauty, for the way the setting sun painted the water in strokes of gold and orange. Her steps slowed as she approached the top of the hill. She could see the familiar willow tree that marked their place, but something was wrong. Her heart began to pound, a frantic, panicked rhythm against her ribs. The neat, green plot she remembered was gone. In its place was a tangle of ugly, thorny weeds, their thick stems choking the life from the grass. They climbed the headstone like grasping claws, obscuring the beautifully carved letters of her parents' names. The flowers she had left a month ago were a withered, brown mess, and the entire plot was filmed with a layer of grime and neglect. It was abandoned, forgotten, desecrated. The promise her uncle had made echoed in her ears. "Of course I'll handle the upkeep, Maya. It's the least I can do." It was a lie. All of it. The words he had spat at her that morning were the truth. To him, this sacred ground was just a field of bones. A sob tore from her throat, raw and ragged. She fell to her knees, dropping her backpack and the white rose. This was a violation far deeper than his angry words. This was a physical manifestation of his disrespect. He was letting them disappear, letting nature erase them as if they had never existed. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. With a fury born of love and despair, she began to tear at the weeds with her bare hands. The thorns scratched her skin, drawing tiny beads of blood. But she didn't stop. She pulled and clawed at the stubborn roots, her small body trembling with the effort. But it was no use. The weeds were too strong, too deeply rooted. Defeated, she slumped against the dirty headstone, her small shoulders shaking as the full weight of her loss and loneliness crashed down upon her. She buried her face in her arms and wept, her sobs the only sound on the quiet hill. Meanwhile, a black car had pulled silently to a stop by the cemetery's main entrance. A tall man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit stepped out. This was James Harrison, the founder of a global tech empire, a man whose name commanded respect in boardrooms across the world. But today, he was not a CEO. He was just a man visiting his best friend on the anniversary of his death. In his hand, he held a large bouquet of white lilies. He walked the familiar path with a heavy heart, his polished shoes silent on the grass. Every year, on this day, he made this pilgrimage. Michael had been more than a friend. He had been a brother. And James had made him a promise in the final, quiet days of his life. A promise to watch over his little girl, Maya. He had tried, but Marcus had been difficult, always making excuses, politely keeping him at a distance. As he neared the gentle slope overlooking the river, he heard a sound that didn't belong in the peaceful silence. The heartbreaking sound of a child's desolate weeping. His brow furrowed with concern. He followed the sound, his steps quickening. And then he saw her. A small, trembling figure huddled by a grave so overgrown he almost didn't recognize it. But he knew that spot. He would know it in 1,000 years. It was Michael and Lena's. He froze, his gaze fixed on the weeping child and the shameful state of his friend's final resting place. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The neglect, the lonely child, the anniversary. A cold, quiet anger began to build within him, an icy resolve he hadn't felt in years. He took a slow step forward, his voice soft so as not to startle her, but laced with a deep, resonant grief. "Maya?" Maya flinched at the sound of her name, her head snapping up. Through a blur of tears, she saw a tall man standing before her. He was dressed in a dark suit that seemed to absorb the pale afternoon light, and his face was etched with a profound sadness that mirrored her own. For a moment she was frozen, a small, cornered animal, her uncle's harshness having taught her to be wary of strangers. The man, James Harrison, seemed to understand. He didn't loom over her. Instead, he slowly knelt onto the damp earth, bringing himself down to her level. The knees of his expensive trousers stained with mud, but he paid it no mind. His eyes, a deep, clear gray, were not filled with pity, but with a startling kindness and a shared pain. "I'm James," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "I was a friend of your father's. A very old friend." Maya wiped her nose with the back of her scratched hand, her small body still trembling. She said nothing, only watched him, waiting for the trick. James's gaze drifted to the tarnished headstone, and a flicker of anger, cold and sharp, passed through his eyes before he masked it. "He used to talk about you all the time," James continued, his voice soft. "He called you his little sweet pea. He told me you had the brightest smile he'd ever seen, and that you gave the best hugs in the whole world." Maya's breath caught in her throat. Sweet pea. That was her father's special name for her, a name no one else used, a name her uncle had never once spoken. A dam of mistrust inside her began to crack. He did?" she whispered. "He did," James affirmed, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. He looked at the chaos of weeds, the dirt, the utter neglect. This is not right, Maya. Your father and your mother, they were good people. They deserved flowers. They deserved respect." His words were like a soothing balm on her raw, wounded heart. He understood. He saw the ugliness and was offended by it just as she was. He gestured gently to her backpack. "Why are you here all alone, Maya? What happened?" The kindness in his voice, the simple, direct question, was all it took. The story tumbled out of her in a rush of broken sentences and quiet sobs. She told him about the morning, about her uncle's cold laughter, about his cruel words. She unzipped her backpack and carefully took out the silver frame, her small hands presenting it to him like an offering. He said, "They don't need visitors," she choked out. "He said this was useless and he threw it." James took the frame with a reverence that made Maya's eyes well up with fresh tears. His large, steady hands were gentle as he held the image of his friend. He traced the outline of Michael's smiling face with his thumb, a gesture of profound and personal loss. For a long moment he was silent, and Maya could see the battle in his eyes, the sorrow warring with a hardening, crystalline rage. When he finally looked up from the photograph, the gentle sadness in his eyes had been replaced by something else. It was the look of a CEO about to dismantle a rival company, the look of a predator who had just caught the scent of its prey. It was the look of cold, calculated fury. "Maya," he said, and his voice was different now. It was still soft when directed at her, but underneath it was a foundation of pure steel. "When your father was sick, I made him a promise. I promised I would always look out for you, to make sure you were safe and happy. I have failed that promise by keeping my distance. That failure ends today." He carefully handed the picture frame back to her. Then he stood up, no longer a comforting figure on the ground, but a tower of immense power. He looked from Maya's small, tear-streaked face to the desecrated grave, and then his gaze went far beyond, toward the distant city skyline where men like Marcus built empires on foundations of greed. "The man who did this," James said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that was meant only for her. "The man who would dishonor his own brother and hurt his brother's child for the sake of money will learn the true meaning of a promise. He will answer for every one of these weeds and for every one of your tears. I give you my word." He bent down and picked up the single white rose Maya had dropped. He gently placed it in the center of the headstone, a beacon of purity in the grime. Then he laid his own magnificent bouquet of white lilies beside it, a silent, beautiful tribute. "We cannot fix this today with our hands," he said, turning back to her. "But we will fix it. I promise you we will. For now, you are not going back to that house." He extended his hand. "You're coming with me. You will be safe." Maya hesitated for only a second. Then she placed her small, scratched hand into his. His hand was large and warm, and it enveloped hers completely, a feeling of absolute security she hadn't felt in a year. He helped her put on her backpack, and together they turned away from the grave. As they walked hand in hand down the quiet cemetery path, the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting their long shadows before them. It was the end of her lonely fight and the beginning of his. The ride away from the cemetery was a silent, cocooning experience. James Harrison's car was the opposite of the city outside. It was a world of soft leather, polished wood, and a deep, humming quiet that absorbed all the harshness of the world. Maya sat in the passenger seat, her small frame almost lost in its plushness. She clutched her backpack on her lap, the silver frame inside feeling like an anchor in this strange new reality. She watched the city lights blur past the window, each one a star in a galaxy she no longer belonged to. James did not press her with questions. He drove with a smooth, steady confidence, but he was acutely aware of the small, silent passenger beside him. He reached into a chilled compartment and produced a small bottle of water, wordlessly handing it to her. Maya took it with a mumbled, "Thank you," her fingers fumbling with the cap. "Are you hungry?" he asked, his voice gentle. She shook her head, though her stomach ached with a nervous emptiness. "We'll get you something to eat soon," he said, not as a question, but as a soft statement of fact. "A warm meal, and then you can rest." The sheer exhaustion of the day, the emotional upheaval, and the sudden, overwhelming sense of security began to weigh on her. Her head grew heavy, and despite her efforts to stay awake, her eyelids fluttered and closed. For the first time in a year, she fell asleep without fear, her small head leaning against the cool glass of the window in a millionaire's car, shielded from the world. She awoke when the car hummed to a stop. They were not in front of a house, but in a private underground garage. James was already out of the car, opening her door. "We're here," he said softly. Here was a penthouse apartment that seemed to float among the clouds, its vast windows revealing a glittering panorama of the city below. But unlike her uncle's house, which was a cold museum of wealth, this place felt like a home. The lighting was warm, the furniture was elegant but comfortable, and a scent of baked bread and cinnamon hung in the air. A woman with kind eyes and hair the color of silver, wearing a simple, clean apron, greeted them at the door. "Mrs. Gable, this is Maya," James said simply. "She'll be staying with us. Could you prepare the guest suite for her? And perhaps some chicken soup and grilled cheese?" Mrs. Gable's smile was gentle and immediate. She looked at Maya's tired, tear-streaked face and the scratches on her hands, and a deep maternal compassion filled her eyes. "Of course, Mr. Harrison. Welcome, dear," she said to Maya. "Let's get you settled in." While Mrs. Gable led Maya to a beautiful room with a bed that looked like a cloud and a view of the entire city, James Harrison walked into his study. The door closed with a quiet, decisive click. The gentle, paternal protector disappeared, and the formidable CEO took his place. He sat behind a large mahogany desk, the city lights twinkling behind him like a conquered kingdom, and picked up the phone. His first call was to his personal lawyer, a man known for his ruthless efficiency. "Arthur, clear your schedule," James said, his voice low and devoid of warmth. "It concerns the estate of Michael Thorne. His daughter Maya is with me now. I am invoking my position as her godfather and the secondary executor of his will. We are challenging Marcus Thorne for full custody, effective immediately. I also want a complete and forensic audit of every financial transaction Marcus has made on behalf of the estate since Michael's death. The word for this is hostile, Arthur. I want everything. Leave no stone unturned." He hung up before the lawyer could do more than agree. His second call was to a woman whose name was spoken only in whispers in the financial world, a private investigator who specialized in uncovering secrets others thought were buried forever. "I have a name for you," James said, his voice like ice. "Marcus Thorne. I want a full financial and personal workup. I want to know where every dollar he's ever touched has gone, who he owes, who he's cheated, every secret he has. I want leverage, Anya, and I want it on my desk by morning." He ended the call and stood, walking to the vast window. He looked down at the glittering tower where Thorne Industries had its headquarters. Marcus was in there somewhere, basking in the glow of his stolen empire, completely unaware that the world as he knew it was about to be systematically dismantled. The war had begun not with a shout, but with 2 quiet, deadly phone calls. Later, after Maya had eaten every bite of her soup and half of the warm, buttery sandwich, James found her in the guest room. She had already fallen asleep again, curled in the center of the massive bed. One small hand was clutching the silver picture frame, which she had placed on the pillow beside her. She looked impossibly small, yet she was the center of the storm he was about to unleash. He watched her for a long moment, the quiet rhythm of her breathing a stark contrast to the fury in his own heart. He gently pulled a soft cashmere blanket over her small shoulders, his touch infinitely careful. The promise he had made to his friend a year ago had never felt more real, more binding. "Sleep, sweet pea," he whispered into the quiet of the room, his gaze fixed on the sleeping child. "When you wake up, the world will have already started to change." Of course, here is part 5 of the story, showing the stark contrast between Maya's new morning and the beginning of her uncle's downfall. Part 5. Maya awoke to a sensation she hadn't felt in a long time: warmth. Not the oppressive heat of a stuffy room, but the gentle warmth of sunlight pooling on a soft, clean duvet. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling was high and the room was filled with a soft, gray light. Outside the vast window, the city was a distant, silent map. There was no cold dread in her stomach, no fear of her uncle's heavy footsteps in the hall. There was only peace. A soft knock came at the door. "Maya, dear, are you awake?" It was Mrs. Gable's kind voice. Maya sat up, clutching the blankets. "Yes," she whispered. Mrs. Gable entered carrying a small tray. On it was a glass of orange juice and a plate of pancakes shaped like smiling faces, with blueberry eyes and a strawberry mouth. Beside the plate was a set of new, comfortable clothes, a soft sweater and jeans. "Mr. Harrison thought you might be hungry," she said with a warm smile, "and that you might like to wear something a little more comfortable." As Maya ate the most delicious breakfast she had ever tasted, she felt a strange, forgotten feeling begin to blossom in her chest. It was hope. Across town, in a sleek office on the 40th floor of the Thorne Industries Tower, Marcus Thorne was feeling the opposite of hope. His Monday had started as it always did, with a black coffee and a series of sharp, demanding phone calls. He was a king in his castle of glass and steel, powerful and untouchable. At 9:05 a.m., his world began to crack. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Thorne, a legal courier is here with an urgent delivery for you. Signature required." "Send them in," he barked, annoyed at the interruption. A man in a crisp uniform handed him a thick, document-sealed envelope. Marcus ripped it open, his eyes scanning the first page. His arrogant smirk faltered. The document was from the law offices of Arthur Vance, a name that made even the most hardened corporate raiders flinch. It was a petition for an emergency hearing. It detailed a formal challenge to his executorship of his brother's estate, citing gross negligence and endangerment of a minor. It demanded the immediate transfer of temporary custody of Maya Thorne to her godfather and the will's secondary executor, James Harrison. And finally, it gave notice of a full, court-ordered forensic audit of every dollar the estate had held since the day of Michael Thorne's death. "Who the hell is James Harrison?" Marcus snarled to himself, though the name sent a sliver of ice through his veins. He knew who Harrison was. Everyone did. But he had always seen him as a ghost from his brother's past, not a player in his present. He grabbed the phone to call his own legal team, his fingers trembling with rage. This was a nuisance, an attack on his authority, but he would crush it. Before he could dial, his private line rang, the one reserved for his most important investors. He snatched it up. "What?" "Marcus, what the hell is going on?" The voice on the other end was panicked. It was Robert Chen, a man who controlled a significant portion of his company's stock. "My bank just called. They're freezing our joint credit line pending a risk review. They said rumors have surfaced about that old Sterling acquisition. They're saying the books were cooked." Marcus's blood ran cold. The Sterling acquisition was a dirty deal from years ago, a secret he thought was buried under layers of legal paperwork and payoffs. "That's a lie. It's a smear tactic from a competitor." "I don't care what it is," Chen shouted. "My money is at risk. We're pulling out, Marcus. We're done." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the receiver, his hand shaking uncontrollably. This wasn't a coincidence. First the legal assault, now this precise surgical strike at the weakest point in his financial history. He felt like an animal caught in a trap it never saw being laid. His empire, the one he had stolen and built with his brother's money, was suddenly standing on a foundation of sand. His confidence evaporated, replaced by the raw, sickening taste of fear. Back at the penthouse, the storm raging in the city below felt a world away. Maya sat with James in a sunlit breakfast nook overlooking Central Park. In front of her was not a plate of food, but a brand new sketchbook and a beautiful wooden box filled with a rainbow of colored pencils. "I remember your mother once told me how much you loved to draw," James said, his voice soft. He wasn't looking at his phone or a stack of papers. He was looking at her. "She said you could create entire worlds with just a piece of paper." Maya ran a finger over the smooth, unblemished cover of the sketchbook. Her uncle had called her drawings a waste of time, but James was talking about them as if they were a form of magic. "Your father and I," James continued, a nostalgic smile in his eyes, "we used to come to this park. He would try to teach me how to skip stones on the lake. He was terrible at it, but he had the best laugh whenever his stones sank like a rock." He was giving her back her memories, polishing them and handing them to her, clean and bright, free from her uncle's tarnish. He was showing her that her parents' love was not a forgotten story, but a living thing. Maya looked down at the box of pencils, then at the empty white page. She picked up a bright yellow pencil, the color of sunshine, of her father's favorite sweater, of the wildflowers she had tried to bring him. With a hesitant, trembling hand, she touched the pencil to the page and drew the first line. It was the stem of a flower. As her uncle's world imploded in a storm of his own making, Maya, in the quiet safety of a new home, was beginning to draw a new one for herself. 3 days. It took only 3 days for Marcus Thorne's empire to be brought to its knees. His credit lines were gone, his key investors had vanished, and the stocks of Thorne Industries were in a free fall. Whispers of old dirty deals had become front-page news in financial journals. Marcus was trapped in his glass tower, the walls themselves seeming to close in on him. He was a king presiding over the smoking ruins of his kingdom, and he didn't even know who had fired the first shot. On the 4th day, he found out. A crisp, formal letter was delivered to his desk. It was not a lawsuit or a subpoena. It was an invitation to a meeting at the offices of Harrison Global for a discussion regarding the estate of Michael Thorne. It was not a request. It was a summons. Defeated, Marcus arrived at the Harrison Global headquarters. He was a shadow of the arrogant man he had been just days before. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot from sleepless nights, and the confident swagger was gone, replaced by the shuffling gait of a beaten man. He was led into James Harrison's office. It was smaller than his own, but it radiated a quiet, immense power. There were no gaudy displays of wealth, only tasteful art, shelves of books, and a large window with the same commanding view of the city. James Harrison sat behind his desk, not looking at a computer or a stack of papers, but at Marcus. His expression was calm, his eyes as cold and hard as granite. "Thorne," James said, his voice a quiet, even tone that was more intimidating than any shout. "Thank you for coming." "What is this?" Marcus blustered, trying to summon a scrap of his old authority. "What do you want, Harrison? If you think you can scare me—" "Scare you?" James interrupted, a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. "No, the time for that is over." He gestured to a thick-bound file sitting in the center of his desk. "This is a dossier compiled by the best investigator in the country. It details every illegal corner you've cut, every investor you've cheated, and every dollar you've siphoned from your brother's estate for the last year. There is enough evidence in this file to send you to federal prison for a very, very long time." Marcus stared at the file, his face paling. He was finished. He knew it. "But I am not interested in sending you to prison," James continued, leaning forward. "That would be a messy public affair, and I have no desire to drag Maya's name through the mud. So, you have a choice." He slid 2 documents across the desk. "This first one is your full, unconditional, and permanent renunciation of your guardianship of Maya Thorne, with full custody granted to me. The second transfers complete control of your brother's estate, every last dollar you didn't manage to steal, into a trust that Maya will inherit when she is of age. You will sign them both. You will walk out of this office, out of this city, and out of her life forever." Marcus looked from the papers to James's unyielding face. "And if I don't?" "If you don't," James said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper, "a copy of that file goes to the SEC, the IRS, and the district attorney's office before you reach the lobby. Your empire will be seized as evidence, and you will spend the rest of your life learning to trade cigarettes for favors in a federal penitentiary. Your choice." It was never a choice. It was a checkmate. With a trembling hand, Marcus Thorne picked up the pen. The scratching sound it made as he signed away his niece and his brother's legacy was the sound of his final, utter defeat. He stood to leave, a broken man. "And Marcus," James said, stopping him at the door. "I'm keeping the file. A reminder, in case you ever feel sentimental." 6 months later, the world was a different place. The name Marcus Thorne had vanished from the financial world, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. The Thorne Industries Tower had a new name, its assets having been carved up and sold off. In a quiet judge's chamber, a final document was signed. James Harrison officially became Maya's legal guardian, the promise he had made to his friend now enshrined in law. On a bright, sunny afternoon, they returned to Oakwood Cemetery. The gentle slope overlooking the river was no longer a place of shame. The weeds were gone, replaced by a lush carpet of green grass. The old grimy headstone had been replaced by a beautiful new one of polished white marble, engraved with the names Michael and Lena Thorne, and a simple, poignant inscription, "Love is a promise that never fades." The grave was adorned with vibrant, fresh lilies and a single perfect white rose. Maya knelt and carefully placed a drawing at the base of the stone. It was a picture she had drawn herself, rendered in the bright, hopeful colors of her new pencils. It showed 4 people holding hands under a smiling sun: her mother, her father, a tall man in a kind suit, and a little girl with a brilliant, happy smile. James placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm taking care of her, Michael," he whispered to the wind. "She's safe. She's happy." Maya looked up at him, her eyes clear and bright. "They know we're here," she said with the simple certainty of a child. "They can see the flowers now." They didn't stay long. They left the cemetery and went to Central Park, to the very lake where James remembered laughing with his friend. He picked up a flat stone and with a practiced motion tried to skip it across the water. It sank, just as he knew it would, with a comical plunk. For the first time since her world had turned silent, Maya laughed. It was not a small, hesitant sound. It was a real, joyful, musical laugh that echoed over the water, full of life and light. It was the sound of healing. It was the sound of a new beginning. James Harrison smiled, his heart full. The wrongdoers had been punished, not just by the law, but by the weight of their own greed. The good had been rewarded with a chance to start over, with a family rebuilt from the ashes of loss. He had kept his promise, and in doing so, had found a new purpose. He took Maya's hand, and together they walked along the water's edge, their steps in perfect sync. A man who had lost a brother, and a girl who had lost her parents, had found their way back to the light, creating a new family forged not by blood, but by a bond far stronger, a love that was and always would be a promise that never fades.